So, hey guys, welcome to another episode of All Bass Creations Effects Tutorials, Demos, and Review. Today we'll be going through why and how to EQ your bass. And pretty much, let's go ahead and start with what it is. EQ is pretty much you boosting or cutting certain frequencies within your bass sound, pretty much. So all you heard right there in the opening there was just my bass flat. It's literally my bass flat and this EQ setting. Nothing else. You don't actually need, preamps and all this extra stuff. All you need is a EQ, and not even EQ that flavors your sound, like, or adds saturation in some way. Like these preamps. I'll give you a quick example. Um, let's. This is my bass. I'm gonna play my bass with nothing on it. Right. That's my bass flat. Now let's look at um let's start with the Magellan. So this is the Magellan with just my bass flat and the Magellan's flat as well. No, none of the curves are on. Right? And now flat, the AG preamp flat. And the SGT flat. Um, and one thing you will notice is they all add something to the sound. Even if I was to take this 1073 pre, turn that on, I have that flat. Right? They all add um, just a little slight flavoring to the sound. Very, very slight, but they add something. If you just add an EQ by itself, let me see, let me add one here. If you add a good EQ by itself, it's going to be transparent when it's flat. Oh, it's not letting me run two of those. Well, let's just change this to. And EQs are types of filters, by the way, in case you didn't know. All right. So, yep. See, this one's flat. Let me turn this one on. So as you can see, if you want a really transparent, like no saturation or none of that added, like bass amps and bass preamps tend to add some sound to it. Like usually the company's signature sound is built in there some way, somehow. If you turn on that TC Electronic head and you turn it flat, it's still gonna have somewhat of that TC Electronic sound. It's gonna sound transparent, just like these. The Magellan and the AG are very transparent, but you can still tell there's a difference between the flat sound and their sound. The AG is the most transparent out of those, but with the EQs like this one, they're very very transparent. That's what a good EQ would be. Very transparent, and when you booster add things, it's not adding saturation. It's just boosting or cutting those frequencies. So typically, with bass sounds, it, depending on what you're going for. So if you're going for more of that mid-rangey sound, of course, you want to be boosting in the mid-range. So you may want to boost at 500 instead of 8. Or you might want to just have like a little frowny face type thing. You may also, might want to do a a cut. I mean, a scoop sound. Scoop type of sound. You want to go with something like similar to this type of thing. And so typically on a typical bass amp or a typical preamp, as you can see I have over here, you typically get either a 3 band or a 4 band, depending on what brand you rocking with. As you can see on the AG, there's a bass, treble, high mid, and low mid frequencies. The low mid is 300. The high mids is are set to 800, and the bass is set to, I want to say 40, and I want to say the treble is set to like anywhere from 5 to 6,000, somewhere around there. I can't remember off the top of my head. Um, and I mean, most of the preamps I use are going to boost around that 40 hertz in the bass frequencies, and then me personally, I generally boost around 40. I generally cut around um, 220 to 300, somewhere around there. If I'm going to, and then if I'm gonna boost a little bit in the high mids, it will be around 800, 1,000 kilohertz. Um, or And then in the high frequencies, I do prefer. Um, I do, I boost around 5,000, 6,000, somewhere in between there. And then I also boost, and that's just a tiny bit around there. And I would boost more around 10,000. And that's more for like it just sound, from when I'm playing, I like that. It sounds like it has a little bit more high headroom. Like it just sound, it's no frequencies up there for bass, for real, you know what I'm saying? So even when you slapping and popping that, it just, it adds some like nice air up there. Even when you boosting from like 10 to 20,000, 10 to 20 kilohertz, or 1,000 hertz, whatever. If it's 20,000 hertz, it definitely it adds like this weird um, airiness to it. So just kind of opens it up a little bit for me. But yeah, so I typically would go something like you see on the screen, or something like this is pretty much the same thing. And as you can see, it still sounds like my bass. It just sounds like my bass EQ, you know, to sit in the mix. So, this is super important. So like how I kind of think of it is like around 40, 50 hertz is the booty, like all the bottom of the sound, all the heaviness of the sound. Around 120, around 100 hertz is where you get like the bass frequency to actually sound a little firmer and kick through. I mean, well, cut through. You could actually boost around 100 more than around 50 or 40, and it gives you a different effect to the bass sound. Let me see. Let me do that real quick. So we're gonna put this on 7. Put this on like 4. Let's put it on 3, 2.5, whatever. So let's isolate some frequencies and see, so you guys can hear. So like I said, that's around there. And then just real quick, low mids, is like the boxiness, woofiness to the sound. So if you want a nice, clean, modern sound, you kind of scoop that out. But if you playing like certain genres, you'll want that in there. Like jazz, you're still gonna need some of that frequency in there and less booty. Just because jazz is more of traditionally more of an acoustic style of music. So you want some booty, but you don't want it to be overburn, you know what I'm saying, to where it is no definition. So when stuff you want a lot of definition, you want to keep some of those low mids in there, or stuff you want to slap and pop, or that real scoop sound, you want to scoop around that 220 to 500, somewhere around there, depending on what room you're in. Then around 800 to anywhere all the way up to 3, 4,000 kilohertz, or 3, 4,000 hertz rather. Um, it would definitely be like all your definition of your sound. So depending on your speakers, depending on what your sound preference is, You can choose which area you will want to boost in that area. That's all your mid range. That's all your definition of your notes right there. Um, and that's the most audible part of the EQ spectrum as well. Um, but you got to realize too, while you're doing that as well, you got piano and guitar and everything else that's in those frequencies. That's in vocals and everything else. So that's why if you notice, I only boost the around 800, but I'll leave you know, the rest of that alone. So it's some room for the other instruments like toms and things like that on the drum, snare, all that stuff is going to be right in that area hitting really hard. So you want to leave room also when you're EQing for other instruments. Understand that every instrument sits in a certain frequency range. So bass is supposed to be the foundation. So you don't want to get to a point where you're EQing and you're getting in the way. That's why they typically only give us 3 bands. It's like, nah. But, I mean, it's kind of true. You don't want to they give you 3 bands that is typically the engineer's going to boost the cut in anyway, and then they allow you to do it when you have like an active bass pretty much. Like my bass boosts at 40 and I have a pull out for the mids, either lower or high mids, depending on if I want to cut my low mids, I'll switch it to low mids and cut. I want to boost my high mids, I'll turn it to the high mids and boost that frequency range. And I also have a high knob, a treble knob, frequency knob. So all these different EQs work together. So if I'm boosting a 40 on my bass, I don't need to boost 40 so hard on other things. Like I know my preamps boost around 40 in the bass area. So I typically won't push hardly any of my bass on my actual bass, you know. So I could literally just EQ on my bass and I would have a great tone, technically. So let's see. Here's just my bass EQ. So I'm gonna turn my bass knob about 75% of the way. My mids knob is around 40%, and keep my treble knob flat. So even without anything else on there, if you got EQ on your bass, you could do a lot. I just went through the frowny face EQ, just went through the different scoop settings. I went through flat as well. Um, so so the biggest thing is when you EQing is what sound are you going for? What shape are you going for? Really, um, of course, flat is always an option. Flat. Um, I like to use a scoop sound. On my So I use two different EQs Well, I use a few different EQ settings. So on my bass, I have two, probably about three main settings. One is a scoop sound, slightly scoop sound. The next one is with the bass a little boosted, mids boosted a little bit, tiny bit more than the bass, and then the treble flat. And then I also have another EQ where the bass is cut and the mids are dimed out all the way up in the high mids frequency, and I have the treble flat, and I use that for various things. Might be tapping, guitar sounds, whatever I'm trying to get to. Um, with the tapping, I might boost the bass a little bit or have it flat. But for the most part, that's the bass setting. But then on the actual preamps, I will have like a scoop sound for the most part, and then I'll use like on the Magellan, I use the different curves, the A and B curve to get different sounds as well. So I might do like that, bam, bam, and I'm boosting, and I'm cutting the mids around the 220 mark, and I'm boosting the highs up. And I might have this first EQ, which is a scooped EQ, curve EQ, the blue one, around 9 o'clock, and I might have this curve B, which is a frowny face curve, around 12. So, and this way, excuse me, I can flip back and forth. And the blue one is my slap tone, the yellow one is my finger style. So, right, without it, with it, all right, curve B. So, you know, even with the Aguilar, um, I would tend to boost the bass, boost the high mids just a little bit. So boost the bass at 3 o'clock, high mids around 1 or 2 o'clock. Um, put the treble around 3 o'clock, and I might cut to around 11 o'clock on the low mids. Or I might leave the low mids at 12. But as you can see, the EQ is super important. EQ and compression are the two most important effects on bass. Like everything else is secondary. Okay, so everything else is secondary when you're talking about um, essential bass sounds. Just EQ and compression, you can do everything you need to do with plain bass, like just bass sounds. Um, if you need it, everything else is coloring or spatial effects or whatever. You know, basically the space you're in. Delay and reverb, or swooshing effects and things like that. But if you're talking about the core sound of your bass, is definitely going to be compression and EQ. So super important. Don't overlook either one of these options. That's why I'm doing these two video series. Right now, compression I did on the other video, and now I'm doing EQ because I feel like they get overlooked for all the fancy effects. Like a lot of everybody always go for the fancy effects and forget that the EQ is super important. So, all right. So this is the ampeg flat, and then I'm gonna EQ it, and you can hear the difference in the way it'll sit. So that's with it flat. Now let's add some bottom to it. Bass. Already usable. Then you can turn this around 220. Cut that to around 11. Right? Plenty of tone on that. Right? Damn. You know, if you wanted a little bit more sparkle, you just add some treble. And the thing is, um, with certain EQs, it allows you to boost and cut in different areas. Um, you know, some EQs, like if it's a mic preamp, or if you're running into like a recording console, those typically aren't. They're transparent, but like if you run into a Neve pre 1073, it's got a certain sound to it. You know, it's a very clean, warm sound to it, but you know, certain EQs are like just EQs. Like certain EQs add texture, you know. So you just gotta pick which kind of EQ you want to do. Do you want something that's gonna add texture as well as boost and cut those frequencies? Because it's like, you know, yeah, you could look at a preamp pedal. If you don't know any better, you can look at a preamp pedal and say, oh yeah, it's got an EQ and this and that. So like when I first bought my first pedal, the Eden WTDI, I was like, okay, yeah, it's got compression, it's got the EQ, it's a DI box, all this. Okay, so I'm thinking, you know, I maybe use it as a EQ, but not realizing how much just the every brand kind of colors the sound a bit. You know, especially the preamps, like bass preamps. All of them color your sound to sound like the brand's signature sound. Like Eden sounds like Eden, Aguilar sounds like Aguilar, and so forth and so forth. So, um, you know, I didn't realize how much like just a transparent EQ is doesn't add anything like, you know, other than boost and cut. You know, some EQs are warmer than others. Some EQs are colder. You know, but they're more precise. So, you know, in terms of EQ, you just want something that's boosting the cut, and like, you know, that's different than the preamps. So you got to realize that when you go and looking at EQs and this and that, you know. So um, I would say the first step would be identify if you want it to color or not. Then look at how much control over the EQ you need. Typically, 3 to 4 bands is fine. I've never taken one of these preamps on a gig and been like, I need another EQ. I've never had to, other than my bass. My bass has its own EQ. And then I usually set these up the way I'm generally going to set them. And I don't really change them too much. I use them each for different types of songs or sounds, genres. But EQ wise, I pretty much set them all up the same because I want the same EQ setting, but I want the different sounds of the different companies, brand, 2 different sound ideas. You know what I'm saying? Those two different concepts. I want the same EQ because I want to be able to manipulate my bass with those three EQs I laid out, which allow me to do everything I need to do from my bass. I just want those to add whatever those companies' tonal characteristics or sonic characteristics are. Same way like a modeler takes, you know, does his thing and emulates those. So um, I would I would say then you want to identify what do you want, a frowny face or a smiley face, or do you want it flat? Because those are pretty much your options. Now the degree of which you do so, it because you can have it like this. Like look at the one on the screen here. You can have it flat and just you say I don't really want to change my sound too much. Let me see. Get these back to 0. Now let me do it on here. Which one we want? This one. Nope. This one. So you can say I literally just want to get I literally just want my most of my bass sound, but I want to be able to just cut some things because sometimes you don't actually have to boost anything. You can just cut stuff. So you can just cut around 500. So that's also a technique. You know, you don't have to boost and cut. You can just cut or you can just boost. Say, I just want to add some booty. I'm going to boost around 40, 50. Or say you don't like that high pitched sound. Say, I'm a cut around, I'm going to cut that 10 all the way down. So yeah, um, boosting and cutting definitely works. So let's do this. Let's isolate some frequencies real quick. Let's turn everything off. So this is just with the 50, with 50 sounds like with everything else cut. So it's that part of the frequency. Now let's see with the 120. And around 100 is another reason why it's a good frequency to boost a little bit on bass. It's because typically the bass drum's sitting below that and everything else is sitting right above that. You know what I'm saying? Like, so it's a good frequency to boost that as well. So there you got to kind of really hear the difference between the different frequency ranges, like, and what part of the sound it is. That's why it's really important in how you're EQing it, because as you can hear, all those are literally different. Even from a 400 to 500 is two different frequencies. Like it's like where it's boosting at right there is completely different. One is way woofier than the other, and it's just like depending on the room you're in, boosting or cutting around either one of those frequencies could make a huge difference for you. You know, so that's why I said, you know, EQ is super important, and it's super important that you experiment with it over time. You know, it's not a set in stone thing either. It's like it's the reason why I always set my preamps like that is because depending on the room and what the room needs, I do the rest of that from my bass. But at some point, I do control those things, like, and depending on, like, it's an active thing. Like every song, I'm literally like changing my EQ on my bass or something, you know, or even multiple times in a song, I might have to switch to a finger style and then go to a solo EQ and then go back to the finger style EQ after my solo is done. So even as I'm soloing, like when I'm coming to the end of my solo, I'm thinking about, hey, you know, I got to get that EQ back to where it was. So I might wait until, like, use my fingers to compensate for how much I boosted the mid range or something, the high mids right there, until I can get to the high mid switch, you know, somewhere when I'm playing bass again. So it's 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 definitely worth using. So another type of EQ that's useful to you is going to be something. Let's change this to. It's called a low EQ on here on the B6, but it's really a high pass filter. So, you know, typically, this pretty much allows you to cut out some of those subharmonic frequencies that make your amp speakers have to work more. Your bass cabinet speakers work more. So let me turn on the actual bass cabinet in the room, and let's not use this one. Let's use, because there's one on the Magellan as preamp as well. So I'm gonna use this as a good example. So let me see. Let's give it some booty. All right. So we're gonna come through the Zoom mics, but I'm gonna play a little bit, and then I'm gonna start turning up the high pass filter on the Magellan. Around 9 o'clock. This is around 32 hertz, 30 hertz. right, now 40. We're going to turn it up to 40. So basically what it's doing is it's not completely cutting out the subharmonic frequencies. It's just bringing them down a little bit less in the less audible range, and letting it focus on the more audible frequencies. All right, so we're going to turn it up to around 50, which is around 12 o'clock on the Gensler Magellan. All right, so we're going up to around 65, which is around 1 o'clock on there. All right, and we're going all the way up to 120. So everything below 120 has been decreased by a certain decibel, and everything else has been is where it was. So as you can hear, it's just taking out just a slightly little bit of it, but it's still got, you know, it's just taking out the subharmonic frequencies. It's not even taking them out. It's just decreasing them a little bit, so your speakers work a little less. Um, especially when it doesn't need to. That's why I just keep it around 30 because I got a low B string and I like it to be felt. So I keep it around 30, 32 on which is around 9 o'clock on the Magellan. But if you don't have the Magellan and you want that same effect and you happen to have like a Zoom pedal or, I'm sure the Helix or the Line 6 stuff will have something like low EQ on it, where you can, it's just a high pass filter. So, I take this high pass filter when it's in high pass mode, this gain doesn't do anything, but you can turn that to whatever frequency you want. So I like mine around 30. And I'm just going up with by 10 hertz every time, which you can see on the screen in the bottom left corner. We already at 70. And 80. And around 80 or 100 is where I would recommend doing a low cut on, like, so if you ever EQing like a whole band or a whole group of people real quickly, um, everything except for the bass and the kick drum and the floor tom need a cut. Um, I would say, yeah, need a cut anywhere 80 to 100 and below, and just letting that rock. That would be the best option. So, all right, let's go up to 100. So it's definitely, the more you go up, the more it's gonna cut out. Oh, I'm lunching. Sorry about that, guys. This is supposed to be going to the amp. Dang it. Sorry about that. I gotta do that again. I'm gonna do it really quickly. So here it is. So as you can see, it definitely cleans up your low end, a lot using a low high pass filter. It's not even something. It's something you wouldn't even normally just think of EQ wise. Um, you just kind of think of it like that would be counterintuitive, I guess. Like it's you would think it would be like that would be counterproductive to run a high pass filter, but it actually cleans it up depending on how hard you're using it. So just a little bit around 30 or 40, and you golden. The reason I love the one on the Gensler preamp is because it still leaves a little bit of it in there. Even though it's cutting it, it still makes sure it's enough of it there where you get plenty of bottom. Something like this one on the B6 you're looking at here is going to cut it a lot more. But either way, if you know, you don't really need those frequencies too much. They kind of just get in the way at certain points. So, from engineering standpoint, audio engineering rather, I'm not that fancy, but from an audio engineering standpoint, it makes a huge difference adding those type of filters. And if you want to get that old school sound, you can just use a low pass filter. So same concept, but you're gonna choose how much of the high end you're gonna be cutting out, and it's literally gonna cut a lot of the high end. So say I wanted to go for an old school vibe. See, this cranked all the way up. This is all the way open. And just as a quick tip, you can use a low pass filter as a way of, like, say you don't want to have to reach in the back of your amp all the time. You can use it as sort of like a makeshift way to turn your horn on and off. Like, but you got to set it up. We're going to do that, but we're going to do this open one first. So direct. And of course, I had my bass, the highs accentuated there just to kind of, demonstrate it a little bit more. But as you can see, you can completely get it a really warm sound without, just booze. If you cut everything from, just leave it around 3200. So completely changes everything, completely. So don't hesitate to experiment with EQ. It'll definitely change your playing. It'll change everything for you. So just experiment with the different types of EQ, high pass filter, low pass filter, um, you know, um, preamps, all that stuff, things that saturate, things that don't saturate. Um, Decide where you want them in your chain along with compression, and that's pretty much all there is to it. That's the majority of it in terms of EQing and or getting your sound to translate in different rooms. It's compression and EQ. That's mostly what it is. Um, the rest of it should be done with your fingers. Your fingers can should have different ways of dealing of getting the sound you want, and you're just using EQ and compression to translate that to the audience. So definitely. So this has been another episode of All Bass Creations, guys. Make sure you subscribe, like, and share. I'll catch you guys next time. I appreciate y'all hanging out with me. Um, hit the Cash App, hit the Super Thanks if this helps you out, and go to allbasscreations.bandcamp. Get my music at the Bass Negus, Negus on all social media platforms. I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.